heard my talk, this is going to feel very familiar to you. But if you are here for the first time, this is all brand new, you'll love it. It's a new presentation. And what I'm targeting specifically is how to help you with aquarium problems that occur. And I try to pick out like 9 or 10 things that happen. I see people post and they're like, this is a problem. And I thought we could talk about some solutions today. So the first thing I would recommend before we even get into problems is to avoid them in the first place, is to keep everything really, really clean. And if you are intimately familiar with your tank, if you can see it from every angle and you're keeping up with what's going on, then all of your stuff is going to be a lot easier to spot when there's an issue. So if you have dirty pumps, if you have dirty glass, if you have salt creep all over the tank, I would say clean all that off. Get it back to brand new. A lot of times I compare this to like you have a car, you just bought it, you're super proud of it, you're making payments for the next 6 years, and you will go ahead and you will wash that car every single week. It has to be spotless. And after about 12 weeks, you're like, okay, well, I can wait a little bit longer. And then it's like 2-3 weeks. And then you're cleaning it like, I don't know, 2-3 times a year, until the day when you're like, I got to really clean it top to bottom because I'm going to sell it and make a bunch of money back. So it's the same thing with aquariums. We actually do the same thing. We care about it like crazy, meticulously in the beginning. And then, I don't know, something burns out in us, and we just don't stay on top of that cleaning like we did. Or we get motivated briefly, we kind of tackle something, and it's a big, long, all-day ordeal. But if you're staying on top of your cleaning regularly, if you're cleaning your pumps once a month, if you're cleaning your return pump every 6 months, you're going to find out if something is breaking, cracking, splitting open, and you can make the repair before the livestock's hurt. It's really, really important to be very, very aware of your aquarium for success. This is not a problem thing, but I wanted to throw it in there in the first place. A controller can make a big difference in your life. If you have a saltwater aquarium, if you have a freshwater aquarium, you set up these tanks, you put in the livestock, and then you kind of hope everything's okay until you actually test the water. Well, a controller has the ability to tell you information constantly. It can give you information about pH anytime, day or night. It can tell you about temperature anytime, day or night. It can notify you if something's not right if you set up parameter warnings. And it'll allow you to basically, when you do a water change, if you don't have a controller, you're pulling out a lot of plugs from the outlets. And then you refill, you drain the tank, you refill it, and then you got to plug everything back in. And invariably, I'll hear someone say, oh, I forgot to plug in the heater. My tank got way too cold. With a controller, you can actually set up a button for a water change, and it will disable all those items for a fixed amount of time, which would turn off anything that could be damaged with a lack of water. And then you do your water change, you refill the tank, and it turns on by itself. That is why controllers are so beneficial, and I highly recommend them. Now, in these screenshots here, you can see on the left square, that is from the Apex Fusion controller. And in the orange panel, it shows my alkalinity, my calcium, my magnesium. This is being measured every 6 hours. So I can literally look at my, I can open up my phone and look at this app and just kind of check my numbers and see how the numbers are doing right now. Not what did I measure last week. This is current numbers. I really do like that, and I use that frequently just for a quick glance. And then in the upper right, I've got a graph where it shows these spikes going up and down, showing how much power I consumed. You can do the same thing and see when your heater's turned on and when they turned off, and you can kind of figure out if there's an issue. And I had a heater actually fail, and I wasn't aware of it at first, and so I went back through these types of logs, back and back and back, till I found the day it failed, and so I was actually aware of what happened, when it happened, and I was able to capture any trends to see what happened thereafter. And then this bottom square on the bottom right, that's from the Hydros controller, which is a very simple system. I just recently got one, I've set it up, and it will notify me if the tank gets a little too cold or if the heater is running too long. And it just, again, it lets me know the pH, which is important on that tank because that tank has a solid lid on top. So there's not a way for good oxygen exchange unless I had this set up with a air stone. So I have the air stone in the tank, and people think it's really old school. I love it because it hides the heater in the corner, but I am tracking the pH carefully. Now, if you are having any kind of problems with your tank and you own a controller, you can actually go look into that, the graph works, and you can see what the tank temperature was at 3 in the morning while you're asleep, what temperature it is at 4 in the afternoon while you're at work. If you are traveling, you can, of course, verify what's been happening while you're away. If you don't have a controller, you don't know these things. You just kind of only know it when it's in front of you. And that's not really great. It's much better to be informed so you can keep track of things and discover where things go wrong so you can make the corrections. There was a person that I was friends with who could not get his reef to grow at all. And he said, everything's set up right. I'm doing everything right. And I was looking at his graphs, and his tank was getting crazy cold every night, like 73 degrees. But during the daytime, while he was driving his semi-truck, it was 79 degrees. And I said to him, why is it always so cold at night? And he had actually programmed his pump to slow down significantly at night for some reason. And I said, why'd you do that? And he said, well, I don't know, so the fish can sleep. And I thought, no, I need you to take your return pump, and whatever the normal speed is, that's normal 24 hours a day. Just let the water do this so everything's heating properly and staying even. And all of a sudden, the corals start growing. It was a miracle. But without that information from the controller, I couldn't have found that out for him. I would have been scratching my head saying, I don't know what you're doing wrong. You should replace the sand bed. I don't know, something dumb like that. And then I mentioned here, make corrections remotely or from any spot, really. What I mean is, you might be working in your tank, working around your tank. You're up on a ladder, or you're working with a lighting above, and you can just pull out your phone and actually activate and deactivate things right there, rather than having to get off the ladder again, go down here and hit a button on a device. So I'm telling you, it's so convenient. I use both controllers equally frequently. And so I do recommend, if you're going to keep an aquarium, you should get one. The phrase water test saves lives was coined by my girlfriend, Caitlin. And it was such a beautiful phrase, and so I give her credit for that forever. And the fact is, I've been telling people you should measure your tank every single week. A lot of people measure they measure it when they think the tank's not doing well, especially when things are not doing well. Then you pull out all your test kits. But if you're measuring every single week like clockwork, you will catch things and make the adjustments in time before the livestock is adversely affected. If you measure on Saturday, like I recommend, and something goes wrong on Monday, and Tuesday's happening, and Wednesday, and Thursday, and Friday, and Saturday, and finally Saturday, you're testing again, something that went really wrong on Monday could be carrying throughout the week because you only measure once a week. So in my case, having Apex Fusion with the Trident measuring alkaline and calcium and magnesium regularly, I literally know what the tank was within the last 6 hours. So it's very, very current information, and I really like having that. And I'll tell you, I run a calcium reactor to add my alkalinity to my tank, and alkalinity I find is to be very, very important for a reef tank. And when mine stops up and nothing's coming out of it, I'll get a notification telling me your alkalinity has dropped below 7.8. And I'll go look, and there's nothing coming out of the tube. But if I only measured once a week, and I didn't look at that tube by walking past the tank and just checking it, I would actually have a problem, and I would test again the following Saturday. My tank might be 6.0, or it could be 5 point something. And these are the reasons we want to test as frequently as possible, but at the bare minimum, weekly is good. The one thing I want to encourage you is, don't be that person that says everything looks fine, and just say that's not testing. That's praying. that's just hoping and assuming and thinking it's all right. It's like, let me check salinity. Okay. Yeah, no, we don't do that. We want to test. And those test kits that you bought when you first got in the hobby, they're not forever. Even though there's some in the bottle still. So if you have any liquid still in the test kit, that doesn't mean it's still good. And I know a lot of us don't like to waste. We just think, oh, I spent money on this and I should use it all. Well, if you're using your test kit frequently, it's going to run out. But if you're using it sporadically, you might be picking up something that's 3 years old that's giving you an inaccurate information, and then you're saying, well, why is my tank not doing well? And you're like, because my test shows it's good. And listen, even a brand new test kit can be a bad kit. And I had bought and used a brand of test kits for a long time, And in that period, I had one of the ones was nitrate. And every time I measured, it said it was like 5 or 6 or 7. I was like, okay, my nitrates are nice and low. And I had a customer say to me, hey, my test kit is measuring way off. This can't be right. And so because he lived in my local area, I said, why don't you just bring it over and we'll test it and I'll compare with my kit and we'll compare with my tank water. Turns out my kit was bad and been bad from the first day, and my tank was more like 80. And so I was really upset about that because I had a kit that was lying to me. And we want to always know what's going on. So the first stage is always have a brand new kit that has been used within the last 12 months. Use it up. If it has gone past that 12-month period, I suggest throwing it away and getting a fresh kit. But do stay on top of it, because if you don't and your tank starts going, into the crapper, you're going to have high blood pressure like me, and that's actually one of my tests. Now here's some of the problems that I see people post, and I want to talk about some of these. The first one would be, my tank is too loud. And so then I'll ask them, well, where's the tank located? And invariably, a lot of times people say, well, it's in the living room or it's in my bedroom. And I can't sleep with the sound of this tank. It's burbling, it's belching, it's burping, it's grinding, it's vibrating. There's all these sound effects. Well, first of all, if the tank is dead silent, that makes me really, really nervous. And I can be in the middle of a dead sleep, and if the power goes out and the tank goes silent, I wake up instantly. I jump out of bed and I go check and see how things are going and what's going on. It's one of my superpowers. But I would say it's sort of like when you've got kids and they get really, really quiet and you're like, all right, what are they doing? It's one of those things where it's the same with your tank. If it gets too quiet, heads up. So a little bit of sound is life. That's important for a reef tank. It's important for our livestock to be healthy, because that means there's water moving through the aquarium. We want to make sure that happens at all times. But if you have something that's vibrating, if it's like, for example, there's the pump on the protein skimmer is hitting the edge of the sump, or it's just bouncing up and down on the bottom of the sump, for example, or there's something hanging in the back of your tank, sometimes you can use silicone mat material as a vibration dampener, or you can, if you want, and I've done this in the past, I had a mag pump that was making a lot of noise in my sump, but if I lifted it up a little bit, it was quiet. So I literally shortened the plumbing half an inch so it would float off the bottom of the sump. Problem solved. I had silence. Now, if you're a person that is trying to sleep at night and your aquarium's making noise, and possibly it's the protein skimmer that's bothering you, if you have some kind of a timer set up, you can literally have it turn off for this duration of when you're about to go to bed, and then kick back on while you're asleep. You're not going to wake up and say, what's that skimmer doing? It'll happen, and you'll be dreaming about it. But your tank will be fine. And so you can kind of have that lull period. If you're using a controller, you could actually set up some kind of a delayed timer where you hit the button on there and it's just going to shut it off for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever duration you like. If your tank is in your living room and you're trying to watch movies and it's like this thing is a distraction, again, being able to disable certain things, but the controller is so important because it will restart that item automatically rather than you having to remember to turn it back on, because invariably we forget. If you're absolutely not going to buy a controller, even though I've been telling you so many times you should, use your smartwatch, use your smartphone, set a timer, set a reminder, so that way, whatever you do, you'll sit there and you're like, oh yes, let me go do that, and you go enable that thing. And listen, I forget things so quickly, I almost feel like I'm a goldfish. I would turn on the RODI system to make water. And what I like to do is purge the first 90 seconds before I start making my good water. And I will just open the valve, I set the timer on my watch, and I walk across the room. And no matter what I'm doing, it's like, oh, and my watch is vibrating. I'm like, God, I just turned that on. I forgot already? How did I forget that? And so I'd set these reminders intentionally. It keeps the floor dry, which is really good. And then I did mention here, if your tank is really loud, you might try slowing the return pump flow down at a lower rate, because when the water's shooting through the system, it's draining rapidly, it's very loud. But if you turn it down to a slightly slower speed, now that we have these variable speed pumps where you can adjust it to 90%, 80%, something like that, you could find that it quiets down. A couple of things for if you're a brand new hobbyist and you didn't know this, when you first plumb your tank together, the plumbing will be loud initially, but after 14 days, it will be much quieter because the inside walls of the plumbing will have slimed over, and that makes a big difference. So if you just set up your tank yesterday and you're like, why is it so loud? Give it 2 weeks. And then if the drain from your tank is in a sump and it's submerged deeply, what happens is as the water and air go down the line, it causes back pressure and surging, and you'll get this burping effect down there and this belching. And that is because the pipe is too long underwater. So I always recommend that pipe should be at half an inch below the surface of the water in the sump. So if you have a pipe super long, I would trim it. That'll make it a lot quieter. Another thing is where the drain assembly is on the tank itself might need some kind of a different plumbing arrangement, or snaking down an airline tube into it to let some air suck in better, usually about 4 to 6 inches in the pipe, and you'll see it, everything becomes a lot quieter. So it is possible to have a nice quiet tank. Another problem that happens is hair algae gets out of control. This is one of those things where it didn't really happen overnight, but you're finally now complaining about it. Now, there are certain things that can cause a hair algae bloom, and one of them could be your lights were on nonstop. You didn't have them plugged in a timer. You're that guy that turns it on, and then at the night you turn it off. Or you weren't on vacation, and you told your tank sitter, can you just watch the tank, and they turn on the light and never turn it off for the next 3 days. And those kind of things will grow a lot of algae. But the rock you have could also cause algae to grow, because the rock, even if it's dry rock, can have a lot of phosphate in it. And so the algae is just coming out of it because it's a natural thing. It's fueling on it, it's growing, and you need more animals in there to eat it to get rid of it. So if you don't have enough snails and hermit crabs and urchins and cucumbers and these different animals to keep your tank clean, yeah, you're gonna have a dirty tank, you're gonna have algae. Now what I tell everyone to do is blow off the rock work with a turkey baster or hold a power head and just rinse everything, right? And that way you kick up all the detritus. I never ever recommend scrubbing rock ever. And the main reason is that as you're scrubbing it, even if you're trying to siphon as you've got a toothbrush or a brush in there and you're trying to catch it, there's more of it blowing around the tank. And it's just gonna latch on somewhere else and spread the problem. If you take the rock out and you're brushing it outside, like on your deck or something, as you're doing this stroking motion and the stuff is spattering everywhere, you're actually aerosolizing and you're inhaling some of that stuff. And we don't want to get anything in our lungs that can make us sick. So I never recommend brushing. I'm just totally opposed to it. The simplest cure I've always done is that I would treat the tank to lower the phosphate level in the first place. So I use Phosphate RX, which is a product you just drip in the tank, and 3 days later the algae is weak, and I can just pull it out. I can literally rip it off the rock easily, compared to if I didn't lower the phosphates. If you just reach in, you start pulling, it's gonna seem like it's really well anchored, where I find that the lack of phosphate in the water column makes the algae weak, and it just kind of pulls off easier. So you rip out as much as you can, and as you rip it out with your hand, your pinches, you rinse your fingers in a bowl of water, clean fingers, go back in the tank, and you get some more. And you keep doing this until you can't stand it, okay? You just do it 20 minutes, like, oh my God, I can't do another minute of this. Fine, that's fine, stop. Tomorrow, do it again. The next day, do it again. And then the final day, it's like, it looks so much better. Now, get some cleanup crew in there. And that's why I said on here, $300. If you look, you're like, what's he talking about there? When people have a really bad situation in their tank, I say, well, for $300, I could fix that. And they're like, okay. And it's like, they're like, yeah, I'll do that. I'm like, get $300 worth of cleanup crew. And they're just like, well, I don't want to spend $5 for a snail or $7 for a hermit crabs. Like, I know, that's the problem. But if you have a lot of herbivores and they're constantly picking and cleaning, you'll never have this algae problem in your tank. And I see this all the time. People say, well, this tank, it didn't look this bad a week ago. I'm like, yeah, I don't believe you. And then it's like, well, tell me what's in your tank. Tell me what cleanup crew you have. And they'll say, well, I've got 2 snails, and I've got a hermit crab, and I've got a flame scallop. And I'm like, what size is the tank? Like 180. And I'm like, well, there's your problem. So if you can get a lot of critters in there, they will constantly clean the rock work and keep the tank looking a lot better. But you're gonna have to be the cleanup crew at first. You rip out the majority of it first, and then they will get what's left, and they'll get in those spots where your fingers didn't fit. Another thing you can do if you want to, if you have the patience for it, you can literally remove the rock from the tank, put other rock in the tank possibly, and take the algae-infested rock and put it inside a trash can with salt water and circulation and a lid on top, and just let it do that circulation thing for a couple of months, and everything in there will die off from the lack of light. And then you have some nice clean rock you can put in your tank again. But that's kind of like worst case scenario. The stuff I described earlier is so much easier and will totally solve the problem. And if you're thinking, well, no, Mark, I checked my phosphates, they're always super low. But if you have a bunch of algae in your tank, your phosphates are not super low. So what you can do is when you are blowing off all the rock work and then you're ripping out algae, then measure the phosphates 20 minutes later, you're going to get a number. You're like, oh, because you've released it into the water column. Now, let's say we get the opposite extreme. I have no nitrate, I have no phosphate, I'm seeing this brown stuff on the sand bed, I'm so frustrated, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong, I've been in this hobby forever, or I didn't have this problem back in the early 2000s, but then I took a break and now I'm coming back in and everything's different. It's like, well, nowadays we actually dose nitrate and phosphate for those tanks that have none. And the reason we do it is because nowadays we set up tanks with dry sand, dry rock, dry tank, nothing living, because we don't want any kind of pest. Instead of the good old days where you grabbed a scoop of sand from the fish store and a scoop of sand from your buddy, and it was all full of muck and disgustingness, and you're like, yeah! And then you got live rock covered in critters and algae and feather dusters and tube worms and mantis shrimp and tunicates, and it was really cool stuff. No one does that anymore. So if your tank is super low in nitrate and phosphate, it actually can lead to something called dinoflagellates. And dinoflagellates were a real plague in the early 2000s for a very small select few of people. Super rare to happen. Literally drove those people out of the hobby. Now everyone has dinoflagellates, and they're joining dinoflagellate support groups on Facebook to get help in trying to understand what they're growing. They're buying microscopes off of Amazon. They're studying cells. They're doing all this stuff. And invariably, they're told, dose bacteria, put in nitrate, put in phosphate, and feed phytoplankton and microbubble the water column, and all these crazy things to deal with this struggle that is dinoflagellates. So we don't want those to happen. So you want your nitrates to be under 20. They can even be under 10, but they should not be 0 or 1 or 1.5 or something super low. And phosphates, anything under 0.1 is fine. 0.03 was the target we've always shot for. Nowadays, a little bit more than that is fine. My tank tends to be between 0.1 and 0.75. So don't be afraid of phosphate at all. The only time I care about phosphate is if algae is starting to grow. If the glass on my tank is turning green and brown, I just feel like the phosphates have risen to the point where I need to treat the tank and lower them. But if you need to put some in your tank, you can buy it. Brightwell sells one called Neophos and Neonitro, and you just dose it to your tank, either manually or with a dosing pump. Easy fix. Here's another one I see. My skimmer doesn't work, and then all the comments are like, well, you need to break it in. I'm like, no, you do not need to break in a skimmer. Skimmers don't break in. It's such a fallacy. It drives me crazy. So I just want to tell you guys that's not true. And now you're like, well, prove that to me, Mark. Like, well, the thing is, again, people are setting up a lot of new tanks with dry sand, dry rock, and then they put in their protein skimmer and they plug it in that day, and there's nothing to skim out. Maybe the dust that came off the rock and the sand, but that's it. And then they just look at it and the bubbles don't work and they're just like, I don't understand. You're not even supposed to run a skimmer until the tank is completely cycled. And a cycle takes 3 to 4 weeks. So when you're setting up a new tank and you start the cycle, whether you're adding ammonia or you're putting in a raw shrimp to decay for 3 days, or any other system you want to use, no lights, no skimmer for the first month. Anytime I've bought a skimmer, in 25 years of doing this hobby, I would put it in my tank and turn it on, and within the hour I had foam. Within 2 hours, I had a little bit of brown stuff on the top, and then by overnight, I'd collect some skimmate. I've never, ever had to have a skimmer break in, and that's because my tank is established. So if you're trying to skim too soon, you'll think it's not working. No, there's nothing for it to do. So the other thing that could be happening with a skimmer not working is that it's constantly overflowing, and they can't seem to figure out what the sweet spot is. Well, the first thing you want to do is go to the manufacturer's instructions and see what's the depth of water it's supposed to stand in. Some need to stand in 4 inches of water. Some need to stand in 9 inches of water.
All right, folks,
and if you're...
Brian Marsike, a reptile expert, giving his talk on the Fluval main stage. At 11:30 up here on the contest stage, saltwater skate-off is going on. 11:30, saltwater skate-off. Be sure to get up here for all the mayhem to ensue. If you haven't gotten your raffle tickets yet, be sure to get your raffle ticket. Thousands of dollars worth of items available in the raffle. And all the proceeds go to 1,000 Marines, a wonderful organization that Aquashella has been working with for years. In addition, official Aquashella swag is for sale. Be sure to get up to the swag booth and get your official Chicago 2022 Aquashella swag that you can sport and make all your friends jealous and envious.
All right, I'm wearing one of those shirts right now. This is it. Woo, modeling. Okay, so I was talking about the height of the skimmer in the water. If it's standing in too much water, the whole body of the skimmer is full of water. Then you plug it in and it just immediately starts overflowing. So if you put a skimmer stand under it to lift it up a few inches, that can make a big difference. Now, one of the easiest way to test this theory is if you buy lunch meat and it comes in with those Ziploc plastic containers, you can just take that container, turn it upside down, put your skimmer on top, and just see how it runs. And you might discover it's working fine. If you don't even want to do that, lift it up and hold it and just watch. That's another easy trick to see what's going on. The venturi could be clogged, and that is another way where it's not letting air in, so it's just sucking in water, so the skimmer has no bubbles in the body. That means it's not working either. You want to clean it. I actually didn't even mention this yesterday, so if you were here yesterday and you heard this talk, you didn't hear this. The hot water trick is really easy to do. Grab yourself your favorite coffee mug, fill it up with some RODI water, put it in the microwave for about 3-4 minutes till it's boiling hot, then carry your mug carefully over to your tank, take the venturi tube from your skimmer and put it in the mug and let it suck in all that hot water, and it will clean the salt that's building up inside the venturi. So the venturi is this little nipple on the intake of the pump that's in the protein skimmer, and that thing clogs up with salt. It becomes rock hard, and no air can get in. So if you do the hot water thing every single week, you'll never have that problem. If you do it every month, you may have a problem occasionally. If you never do it, that's what you should have been doing. But what you can do also is if it is obstructed and it's not letting air in, you can't then suck in hot water. It's not going to work. But if you'll take a drill bit the exact same size as that orifice, you can just take the bit and put it in and twist. You'd be doing this over your sink, okay? You hold the part of the plastic with a nipple, you put the bit in there, you just kind of carve it out with your fingers. Don't hook it up to a drill, don't trigger it. Just use your drill bit and carve it out so it's perfectly clean again. Install it back on your pump and you'll discover that the skimmer is operational completely. Now, if your skimmer is super noisy, it could be vibrating, could be the pump is vibrating against the side of the sump or against the bottom. Maybe a rubber mat underneath it could make a difference. And then also, minor adjustments are so important when you're trying to dial in a protein skimmer. I'm pretty sure every one of you takes a bath or a shower in your lives, right? So you know how it works. You're in there and it's like it's not quite warm enough. So do you turn the hot water 5-6 times really quick? No, you change it slightly. You just barely turn it like, that's a sweet spot. That's what I want you to do with your skimmer. I want you to just slightly adjust it and then see what it does. Slightly adjust it. If you're one of those people that twist, to untwist, and you can't figure out what's going on, it's because you're making massive changes and you can't find what's going on with your skimmer. So make minor ones. And then finally, if your skimmer really doesn't work, maybe you need to get a better one. So keep that in mind. For fish disease, everyone comes to me with their fish disease problems. It's a problem. My fish has this. My fish has that. They have these flukes. They have ick. They have velvet, uronema. There's patches. There's scales. There's this. There's that. They're missing their tail. I don't know any of those answers. I can't help you. So I point everyone to Humble Fish's website, which is literally in your browser. You type in humble, fish, hit enter, and it'll take you right there. That guy loves fish, knows everything about fish disease, and he will help you solve your problem. So take a picture of that screen if you need to, and never ask me again about fish disease because I know nothing. And people say, well, that's not possible. You must have had ick in your tank. Like, no. Well, you had velvet. No. Well, how did you not have those? Like, I don't know. I got lucky. But the fact is, I haven't had to deal with it, so I can't give you advice on it, and I don't try to tell you stuff I don't know. So instead, I point to the people that do know. That's my job. Another one that I see people complain about is that my corals aren't growing. So I picked some random pictures here, and I wanted to show you some things about these. So on the left, that's a larger picture of a Montipora, and the tips are white. And people are like, my coral's dying. I'm like, no, that's normal. The white tip is the new growth. That's a good thing. You want that. But they said, well, I heard white is bad or white is dead. Well, if it was dead or dying, there would be algae growing on those spots. And if that was happening, you could take some snips, like some bone cutters, and you can actually trim off the tip of the coral, put a dot of super glue gel on top, and that will stop any algae from growing, and the coral will grow over that super glue, and it'll look good again in a matter of time. But if there's white at the base of the coral, yes, something's happening to your coral. If the skin is coming off and you're seeing a lot of white bony tissue, yeah, the coral is dying or it's in distress or it's RTNing, which means it's rapid tissue necrosis. And you don't want any of that stuff that's flaking off to land on another coral nearby. You want to siphon that out before it can hurt other corals so it doesn't spread. Now in the upper right picture, there is a coral, and if you'll notice closely on the rock, there's what I call puddling. The skin is growing out. So while the coral may not be growing at all, the puddle at the bottom could be getting wider and wider. That's growth. That counts. And it's actually a really good sign that it's adhering to the rock. If your corals are just moving like this in the flow, and what I mean by that is they're rocking like a rocking chair, not they're a soft coral that's supposed to move, okay? I'm talking about the base. If it's kind of just like holding on for life, trying to stay on its rock all the time, that is not going to let the coral grow. It needs to be secure. So you want to glue or use 2-part putty to bolt it to your rock work, and that way it's secure and the coral will grow. Now, if you have way too much flow through the tank and it's just peeling the skin off the coral, that could be also affecting it. And there's other things that can happen, so we're going to keep talking here. But in that very bottom corner here, bottom right, you can see little tiny polyps sticking out of the corals. If your corals don't have these polyps showing up at all when you're looking, and you might need to take a picture with your phone or grab a magnifying glass or the flipper that you hold on your tank that has a big magnifier, those are really nice to see corals from a distance. If you don't see those polyps during the daytime, take a look again late at night, like 1 in the morning, 3 in the morning, whatever, and see if they're out during the night. Because if they're out during the night, then something is irritating that coral during the daytime, and that's why you're not seeing the polyp extension. So what flow do corals need? It depends on the coral. Soft corals don't need much flow at all. They just need some, enough, just a little bit of movement. They're kind of wiggling. LPS corals, they need to have some gentle flow. And like again, if I said if you were doing a lot of flow through the tank, if you really got a power head blasting water across and the coral's tissue is just like leaning over and seems to be peeling off the skeleton, it's too much flow. And LPS corals don't like too much flow. So normally we put those large polyp stony corals down in the bottom. Now I'm talking about Euphilia, which would be frog spawn, torch corals, hammer corals, elegance corals, scolemia and fungias, and all these types of large polyps that have a single base. Those right there, like gentle flow, and we like to put them down low in the tank on purpose. But then like the other coral I showed you here in the bottom right, that's an SPS coral. Actually, all these are SPS. All these corals right here in the Acropora family, Montipora family, they need lots of flow. They need to be up high in the tank where they get lots of light, and they can take a beating. They actually like a lot of intense flow in your tank. So if you have like one power head and the tank's pretty large, that's probably not enough. You probably need 2, 3, maybe even 4 to create some increased flow, or maybe turn something up, make an adjustment, angle the nozzle another way. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to get the right flow, but you have to look and see how the coral's responding to that activity to know if it's the right decision. Stability is so important with corals, and like I talked about earlier, if the temperature is dropping super low and then raising really high, that's not stable. If the alkalinity is rising and falling because you're doing a water change every 2 weeks and that's the only way alkalinity gets in the tank, that could be another problem where it's not stable. So we want, if you, for example, said, well, I am picking the number 8.5 for my alkalinity, that needs to be your number every single day for the week, for the next week, for the next week, for the next month. That should be your number forever, basically. And if you're at 6.0 and then 8.5 and then 22 and then 3, and those are really extreme numbers. If that's happening, number one, you're not testing frequently because these numbers are way out of whack. And secondarily, the instability is what's causing these corals to not want to grow and not do well. I am going to encourage you to be more patient with your tank. Every single time anyone has a problem with their tank, they want the solution, they want it now, I understand, and I agree. But then even after you solve it, you have to wait for nature to take its course. So whenever something goes wrong in my tank, I just look at the situation, I find the problem, I solve it, and then I tell myself mentally, okay, this will look good in 12 weeks. And it's a hard one to swallow. I mean, it's the same with your lawn. If you're trying to fix a patchy lawn, you're not going to fix it that day. Even if you cut out the bad spots and put new stuff in there, it's not going to look right for a while. And you might have said to yourself, well, it's going to look good in 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And it's just how it is. And then I mentioned so many hungry polyps. The corals need to be fed. Now, I don't actually feed corals directly. I feed the fish poop in the water, the corals eat the poop, and everyone's happy. And that's been my method for a super long time. But it is possible that your tank is so young, so clean, so pure, that there's no food available. So perhaps broadcast feeding would be the solution. In that situation, you would just go ahead and mix up some food and water, pour it in the tank, stop the filtration, allow the the food cloud to move throughout the system with flow, and the polyps are absorbing this food, and then after that's completed, you can restart your pumps. And that is a method you can do once or twice a week, and that can make a difference. We want to not overfeed the tank, but we definitely need to feed enough so that everything can grow. And then lastly, is every coral affected equally? Are they all doing badly? Or is it just this one coral won't work, but everything else is happy? Because number one, remember, everything else is happy. That's so important. We get so fixated on the negative that we lose track of all the goodness that's happening. So don't forget the good part. And then the one that's not doing well, if you can't help it, then it just doesn't work out. In 18 months, it could work out perfectly. It's just one of those things where, and certain corals may never work for you. I mean, for the longest time I told people, I can't grow green slimer and I can't grow blue tort. Now these are old school, bulletproof corals. I couldn't grow them whatsoever. I put them in the tank and they die. I get another frag from a friend, it would die. And I was like, oh my God. And now I actually have both of those corals in my tank. Only took me 25 years, but I got it. So I'm proud of myself. How about my corals look bad? That's another complaint I see, or what people perceive as a problem. And when it comes to the corals not looking right, sometimes it's as simple as the spectrum of your light is the wrong spectrum. I also run an anemone cube, which is a 60-gallon aquarium that's filled with anemones and clownfish. And I would give people anemones out of that tank, and they'd put it in their tank. And my friend AJ said, man, those anemones you gave me, they're gorgeous. And I was like, yeah, I know, they're awesome. And he's like, no, seriously, they're fantastic. And then he'd come visit me, and he'd look at my tank, and he goes, why don't yours look like that? And I was thinking, that's odd. I mean, I kind of agree with you. I'm not really sure why they always look better in other people's tanks than mine. And so one day I got into my Radion programming, and I kind of adjusted the colors a little bit and increased the intensity 5% stronger. So I went from like 75% to 80. And the whole tank looked so much better. I was like, ow. I had to do this to make my stuff look better. So that could be your case too. Now, it could be something else. It could be that you're running your lights so intense for so long every single day that the corals are just getting baked, and it's actually making them pale and miserable and shriveled or exhausted, and they just can't thrive. So I am not the kind of I don't encourage anyone to run their lights 12 hours a day. Everyone wants to do that. Everyone says that's normal, that's nature. No, it's not. If you were in a coral reef somewhere and you could spend all day long there, I would encourage you, I dare you to do it. Go find yourself a coral reef and stand there for 12 hours and see what happens with the light. The sun is over there, you're there, standing in there up to your thighs in water. The sun's coming up. It's pretty. The corals are in the shade. And then the sun starts rising, and you can start to see the corals. And then, you've been standing there 5 hours. Now the sun's above you, and it's blasting down, and you can see everything. It looks fantastic. And then the sun starts heading down, and it still looks nice. It's looking good, And then it's heading over here.
All right, folks, just 10 minutes till the saltwater skate off on the contest stage. Be sure to get up here and check it out. You're not going to want to miss it. Saltwater skate off on the contest stage. Preparations are already prepared for beginning.
Okay, I think he's done. So I would recommend creating a high noon schedule for your reef tank, and you would run your lights intense for like 3 or 4 hours during the middle of the day, okay? You can ramp up earlier and you can ramp down, but don't do the ramp up for 30 minutes, 100% all day long, 30% down at the very end for like 12 minutes. Don't do that. That's the problem. They exhaust the corals. Also, if you have corals that are just not doing well, go sit across the room and see if the fish are nipping at that coral, and that's what the problem is. Because it could be that fish is just pecking at it nonstop and the coral can't survive. I went to the fish store. I bought this beautiful frag. It was called a German blue polyped Montipora. And I thought it was gorgeous. I mean, it's a brown stick with blue polyps. So I glue it in my tank. And the next day, it's bone white. It's dead. I'm like, oh. I got so mad. I went back to the fish store and said, you sold me a bad coral. Actually, this is a true story. I was younger and dumber. So he said, what are you talking about? I said, you sold me this frag. Look at this. It's dead. You owe me a frag. And he was just like, so he said, I'm going to give you one more. One time. I'm never doing this again. I was like, all right, fine. I'm happy. He's not happy, but whatever. Got my frag. I'm leaving. I go home. I plant it in my tank. That night, I'm sitting on my sofa watching the tank, and my flame angel goes up to that stick and goes, pow, 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 pow. It ate every polyp off of it. I was like, oh, that was not a bad coral. That's a naughty fish. So I went back to the fish store and apologized because it wasn't his fault. And now I knew what was going on, and I knew what to look for. But you see, that's the thing. We tend to only look at the tank briefly. Not very many people stare at their tank nonstop like a screensaver. It's just one of those things. I don't know. At least I can't. Maybe you do. Do you stare at your tank for 9 hours a day? Anyone? Anyone? Yeah. Oh, there's one person. All right. So there's always one guy in the crowd. And then also I mentioned, could it be a neighbor conflict? Could you have another coral next to the coral in question that's getting stung with sweepers, chemical warfare? Is it downstream of the other coral and the chemicals coming off of it is just really irritating the next guy over? These are all things that can be corrected. You can change the lighting spectrum, you can adjust the schedule down shorter, you can lessen the intensity for most of the day. Really, I like a light schedule to be about 9 hours a day, and I just start the tank much later in the day so I can enjoy it into the evening. I don't need it to start first thing in the morning. I don't even get up till the crack of noon. That's just, I don't know why you guys get up so early. And then this phrase is just irritating me. And I don't know if you've seen it, but people are like, this thing is trash. It's such a specific term that I'm offended. I'm offended for every manufacturer out there. They build a pump, they put it in a box, they ship it to you, and then somebody calls it trash. And I don't know. I'm weird that way. I like to talk to people the way I want to be spoken to, and I try to be nice. So first thing, contact the manufacturer and see if they can help you with a problem before you blow them up on social media and hate on them, because it may be a user error. It may be it was bad in the box. It could be. You never know. You might be able to take it apart, whatever this thing is, inspect it, solve the problem, put it back, and get it going again. It's not trash now. Could be under warranty, and they can take care of it. So they may want to say, well, we'll send you another one, but you need to give us a deposit, and then we'll ship you this now, and then when when it comes in, you will return the other one, and we'll never charge your card. That could happen too. They may even charge you money. I don't know. It's possible. Doesn't mean that the item was bad. And then keep in mind too that when something goes wrong, something breaks, don't neglect it or procrastinate and say, I need to get to that. That is one of the worst things you can do. If your tank is doing really well and then this Tunzi pump, for example, stops running. Tunzi is an old brand, but it's still around. But I don't think anyone here has one. But let's just say this pump stopped. You're like, yeah, I need to take care of that. And a day goes by, and 2 days, and a week and a half, 2 weeks. That pump has not moved one drop of water for 2 weeks. Your coral is going to be declining. Your tank is not getting the circulation it's used to. The oxygen level is changing. It's the detritus is landing and staying everywhere. It's getting more dirty. It's a problem. You need to remove that pump from the tank. You need to take it apart, see if you can just clean it, which might solve it, and get it back in the operational status, because the sooner you solve it, the better. The longer you wait, the more of a chaos you're going to cause in your aquarium. Maintenance is absolutely key. You don't want to hold off on this stuff. You don't want it to become a big 2-day ordeal. You just want to deal with it now, tackle that one thing right now, get back to your life. A phrase that I was taught as a kid from the Boy Scouts was to be prepared. So I always tell people, what can you do to make sure that you are prepared for anything? Well, how about this one? This is another complaint that I see. My tank is leaking. The bottom let go. Well, this is going to be triage. It's crisis mode. You're going to need to collect as much of that salt water as you can from the aquarium. Number one, if it's draining or leaking near the top, to get it below that spot so no more water gets on the floor, okay? While the water's out of the tank, you can then take the livestock and put it in that same water. You can add air stones, you can add power heads, heaters. These are the basics to keep livestock alive while you deal with this disaster of a tank that's leaking. People talk about resealing, they talk about putting in super glue, they talk about the stuff you slap on the tank, like every commercial. That stuff doesn't work, by the way. I tried it once. But you want to make sure that your livestock is safe, and you need to have places to put this livestock. So if you've bought an aquarium and you've bought your test kits and you have your fish net, that's not enough. You need some extra vessels. If you're a person that upgrades tanks from the old one to a bigger one, save the old one. That could be a great emergency tank, quarantine tank, hospital tank, catch-all for anything if something goes wrong with the aquarium. A long time ago, I was saying, I had a 280-gallon aquarium, huge. And I said, I should get another one and just keep it in the back room, so if this ever fails, I can just grab that one and put it in there and move everything into it. And I thought, that's insane. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to buy an extra tank. But I did buy a Rubbermaid trough that held 100 gallons of water. And just shy of 6 years old, that tank leaked. And I filled my trough. I borrowed another 100-gallon trough from another friend and filled that trough, moved all my livestock into those troughs, moved my lights over it and rigged them up, moved my controller probes in there to keep track of everything, added my pumps on the side to keep flow in the tank, plumbed it all into the sump that wasn't leaking, so that filtration was still going, and everything was okay. That's the kind of thing you have to be prepared for. It could happen, and it's good to have some of the stuff on hand immediately, not scrambling while the floors are still soaking wet. Then, of course, shop vac and towels and floor drying fans are going to be they're going to be your fans. Now, other emergencies can happen, and when we are spending so much money on our tanks, this is, by the way, the final slide. I'm not trying to wear you out. If emergencies are happening, and it could be the power went out, it could be the return pump failed, it could be something spilled into the tank, you see diseases or pests in your aquarium, do you have some kind of a plan of action? That is a really important thing to have in place right now as you're sitting here listening to me. You have to say, do I have anything to handle these situations? Because when you're in the middle of it and your hair's on fire, it's really hard to get the stuff done. And invariably it's Friday night, 1 in the morning, everything's closed, and you can't call a friend. So that's why I recommend always having extra gear on hand. If you have a return pump, have an extra return pump in the closet, brand new in the box, so you can just swap it out immediately. If you are dealing with the problems of corals that are sick and dying, you need dips for them. You need to have this stuff. You want to have the products to correct the inconsistencies of your water column. Let's say the tank overdosed with alkalinity and the pH is sky high and the tank has turned milky white. Do you have white vinegar on hand to bring that pH back down? Do you know how much to use? I mean, that should almost be like a little post-it inside your door. 1 teaspoon per this many gallons will lower it this much. So you have a little cheat sheet that you can look at. You should have in all your test kits, you should absolutely still have an ammonia test kit, even though the only time we test for ammonia is during the cycle, because when things are dying in your tank, you have to know the ammonia level to see how bad it is. And then I mentioned you should have prime as well. Always have a brand new bottle of prime in your inventory to pour into the tank. And you can use it at 200%, you can use it at 300%. It's completely livestock safe, and it'll lock up ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, chlorine, chloramine. It's very inexpensive stuff. A cap full goes for 50 gallons of water. And when anything goes wrong in my tank, I will pour prime into my system. If I'm making new salt water, my tank is acting weird, I don't trust the city anymore, they're adding something I can't measure, I put prime in my new salt water. And I remember I called the fish store and said, hey, are you putting prime in your salt water at the store? He goes, yes. And I was like, so am I. And he said, I can't believe we're both doing it. I said, yeah, there's something wrong with the city water. He goes, I know. So, it's a nice safety. We don't know exactly what's wrong, but we do know that prime locks up some evil, nasty things, and it's really good to have. I do want to mention on this slide just a second ago, I said, what if something spills in your tank? Well, here's something that you've probably never thought could happen. And this poor guy had this beautiful reef tank, had a stand with wood cabinetry work, the canopy around it, and something got in the tank and everything was going wrong, and he couldn't understand it. So he went downstairs into the basement to see the sump, and it was filled with bubbles, just all this foam. And he looked up above the sump, and you could see the wooden boards of the floor above. That was the laundry room, and a jug of Tide had spilled into that floor, came through the slats, and just dripped straight down into the sump and filled the sump with soap. So was he wrong for not being prepared for that? I mean, how do you anticipate such a weird thing? Well, Murphy thinks that's the perfect setup and will come for you. But what you can do now that you're aware of this crazy story, we learned from his mistake. Look above your sump. Is there anything weird that could possibly fall in? Do you have a vent fan that goes to the roof that could drip things in? Is there anything? Could you hang some kind of a shield on the ceiling above that sump so if anything did drip, it hits the board and goes off the edges and not into the water? These are one of those weird things that I was like, wow. And I've seen some nutty stuff. And then if the power goes out, you have choices of keeping power going with your tank. Like I said earlier in this talk, if it gets quiet, makes me really nervous. So batteries are my favorite. That's what I like to use. I have these big motorcycle batteries and car batteries, and they charge all my pumps to keep them going. A generator, even better. Last year, we had this ice storm in Texas that took out power for 20 million people for like 5+ days. My generator exploded. It wasn't hard used, but there it was in the middle of this thing. Boom, boom, through a drive shaft or something. I don't know what happened. And I had to beg for another generator from my friends on Facebook at 1 in the morning, thinking there's no way this is going to happen because everyone needs power. And yet a friend of mine 2 miles away had a brand new one in the box. So I borrowed his to get through my emergency. And then, of course, mine, I had one. I was prepared, but it broke. How do you prepare for that? It's just bad luck. So after the storm had passed, everything was back to normal. I did go and I was in Costco. They had a brand new one. It works on natural gas. It works on propane. It works on gasoline. So I have 3 different ways to keep that thing running. And it even has a battery on this one to start it by pushing a button, which is so much cooler than yanking on the rope like a lawnmower. So if you can have a generator, that would be ideal. They even make small ones for apartment dwellers that are, I mean, they're going to do the basics, but you could run an air stone and a heater, or you could use an air stone and a fan if you're trying to cool it. So there's ways to get some power. And then some people use what's called a power inverter, and they run a long, well, they hook it up to their car, I believe, and then they run a long extension cord to run like an air pump with just bubbles in the tank. Just a little bit helps keep everything alive during that duration. You don't have to run everything. You don't have to run the skimmer and the lights and all those things. All you gotta do is keep water moving through the whole system. I like to keep the return pump going if at all possible. You should also have the things I talked about: buckets, barrels, troughs, bins, Rubbermaids of any kind, and then salt. I don't know how many times people said, I have an emergency and I don't have any salt. I'm like, how do you not have salt? So I'm not saying that to berate you. I'm saying have salt. And Amazon can get it to you tomorrow, but when the emergency's now, you can't wait till tomorrow. And last thing, I want to call a friend from the game show. Maybe you're friends with a fish store owner and you've got his phone number and you say, I need salt now. Okay, and I'll meet you at the store. I'll be there in 30 minutes. That would be really nice. Not guaranteed it'll happen, but it's a possibility. Or if you have another reef keeper friend of yours and you can call them up, they can give you some salt. But I mean, have someone you can call. Don't be Superman. Don't try to handle it all yourself. Ask for help. And if your spouse is getting upset, this is taking too long, explain to them that you're already stressed out, you're worried about the animals, and just kind of do something like this. What if these were puppies that were in trouble? Because it's not a fish. It's not a coral that looks like a plant. It's dying puppies. I have to help them. I mean, when you have a sick dog or cat, you take it to the vet, you will sit there and wait forever till the doctor sees you. Then they tell you all this stuff, and they tell you the bill, and you're like, oh my God, and then you just pay it, and they fix it, and you bring your pet home, and you're loving on it. It's the same. We just can't hug our tanks the same way because people think we're weird. But you want to make sure that you are taking care of this stuff, and you have to explain to them, I need you to support me. I need you to understand this may take all day. I'm going to be stressed. We might be dealing with this for days, and I need you to help me get through this, and don't be mad at me, and don't be yelling at me. You can yell at me in a week when it's all fine. Then we'll have a huge discussion. But for now, be nice. Thank you so much for listening, guys. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.